And today I'm going to be demonstrating the butchering of a deer based on wild harvest videos from Master Chef Milo Shahalka. I am an amateur at this, but I'm going to do the best I can to duplicate what the Master Chef has done. I took this deer on about, I think it was October 7th. Today is about the 22nd, and I'm going to, now that it has aged, I'm going to remove the hide first. So I'm going to lower the deer off of the hanging rack after it's been aged and start to remove the hide. This is a 4-point buck that I ended up taking with a bow, and at about 50 yards it ended up being a neck shot, but the deer was taken pretty quickly. So I'm going to lower the deer now, get it on a hoist. What I've done here is I've cut around the sort of the shin to clear the skin away from the legs, and I've cut that down and loosened the flanks, and as you can see, the hide has started to dry out after roughly 2 weeks of aging. So I'm going to just begin to tear the hide away from the rest of the meat, and trying to be careful to make sure that the meat does not end up ripping as I go through. I want to try to maintain that layer of subcutaneous fat around the animal as I go. Once I end up starting to loosen this up from the dried portions, part of it should come away a little bit easier with just a pull of the hand here. Trying to preserve the meat again and staying away from that. To the tailbone portion. I've already got a cut around the tail itself, and continue the process of trying to get to the point where I can cluster the hide in a ball, tie it, and pull the rest of the hide off with my truck. Now, initially I had the deer hanging up from its head for roughly a week. To allow the carcass to dry out. I had a brace holding the chest cavity open, as well as after I had cut through the pelvic bone, I ended up with a small piece to ensure that that portion of the deer was opened up. Then I flipped it around and dried it the other way around, hanging it up from in between the tendon and the femur bone. I have cut the hide around the tail and ended up pulling the hide off most of the tail, and cut the piece of tail off where I couldn't get the hide off of the tailbone itself, and throwing that away. I'm going to continue to just simply pull the skin as I go here. Trying not to take off too much of any of the meat, as I want to use as much of the meat as possible, even if it is stew meat. The deer has been aging in my garage here for the last couple of weeks, and the temperature outside really hasn't gotten above about 60 degrees. It's been pretty cold at night, roughly 38 to 42 degrees pretty regularly. So because the hide has been on it, I'm not too concerned about the amount of bacterial growth that has occurred. I did end up noticing at some point during the aging process there ended up being a light sheen, which may have been a mold growing on the inside of the carcass. So I ended up washing down the carcass with a towel soaked in vinegar to try to kill any bacteria at that point. Now, because I'm now butchering the deer and removing the hide, it becomes more sure that the major cuts of the meat are taken care of and cooled as quickly as possible after I'm done with the initial butchering. Because it is raining outside today, I may not end up utilizing the truck to pull off the hide, so I'm just going to continue to work my way down the hide. Now, as I mentioned, I ended up making an incision down along the neck to the chin bone. I'm going to end up going from that point over to the arms with the purpose of dragging the hide right down off of the front legs. These are not arms, but continue to do that process here shortly, and I'll get right back to you. Okay, now that I have the hide down pretty much at least to the shoulder level, I'm going to end up cutting off the front legs just about, just after the elbow. All right. Now you might be able to see how the arrow ended up penetrating through the neck area, just in front of the front left leg, and ended up coming out just behind the right front leg. So it's possible I ended up getting part of the lung as well, which led to a deer's speedy death. I'm trying to stay kind of away from those areas. That's part of the meat that's going to be cut away and not used. Okay, now that I have removed the hide pretty much in its entirety, it is time for the deer to lose its head. I'm going to try to go pretty close to the top of the head here, cut right through the whole thing. If I was saving the hide, I would have removed the hide pretty close to as soon as I had taken the deer, and then laid out the hide and put about 3 pounds of salt on it, left it for about 3 days before folding it up upon itself as such, and then rolling the whole thing up to be taken to a taxidermist. Because you can see it's all dried out already, not suit well for that purpose, so out it goes. Okay, after cleaning up a little bit, sweeping up some of the loose hairs and such, I'm going to start to remove the front legs next. I'm going to remove some of these hairs as I go. Now, there is really nothing holding the front legs on per se. Trying to cut around to salvage some of the muscles that exist. So starting out here, to work my way around, trying to stay sort of in the seams. Okay, I don't know if you can see this. I've loosened this somewhat here, trying to preserve as much meat as possible, and just simply working my way around, trying to follow sort of the lines of the sinew as I go, and try to find where whole shoulder separates here. Right on the fat bone. Get a little twist here. Let me figure out where shoulder muscle needs to be separated from the bone. There. side. Put that on ice shortly. Okay, once the front legs have been removed, the next step is to start working our way to cut the saddle out. Alright, and I'm going to simply start in front of the legs. Try not to cut away too much of the good meat. And you can see the tenderloins here. And so I cut in toward the tenderloins, and I'm just trying to follow right along the side of the tenderloins without cutting into them too much. Pretty much straight down, parallel to the spine. And I'm going to do the same thing from the other side. And on the right. Some tough stuff there. And again, following parallel to the spine. Trying not to cut into the tenderloin. I'm not exactly sure exactly where to cut off the neck, so I've arbitrarily, if you will, chosen the third rib up, identified the spot where that comes through, and I'm going to end up using that as a cutoff point. As you might be able to see here in the video, you can see I did end up penetrating probably the lung area and ended up severing two of the ribs anyway. So I'm going to end up cutting all those away and discarding them and saving the neck meat. Okay, at this point I have cut through the breastbone with the hacksaw and cut through at the third rib there. Most of the rest of the neck. That, I'm going to figure out how much of that portion of the rib and neck to salvage. I'm going to end up cutting off the ribs next, and then work on the second vertebrae down, trying to salvage as much of the tenderloin as possible. I'm cutting up in through this area. Removing the tenderloins, and then cutting off the ribs here. Okay, next I ended up cutting down along the back strap. Actually cut from the back side of the meat to try to preserve as much of the meatiness and the major muscles as I could as I cut the rest of the ribs off of the one side. I'm now going to duplicate that on the other side before cutting off the saddle. The saddle I'm going to cut off at the second vertebrae. There's the first, there's the second, and just after that is where I'm going to cut straight across. Alright, we have the saddle. Next I'm going to get the next major pieces, and that is by simply cutting the legs directly apart as close to the spine as I can get. And then that'll be the major butchering portion of this. I'll get there in a second. Thank you.